Welcome in, Hokies fans, to this edition of the Tech Sideline podcast. We record on Wednesday, November 9th, as we get you ready for Saturday's game on the road at Duke. On today's episode, we'll discuss how the Blue Devils have been able to find so much success in an unlikely year and how the Hokies might be able to spoil it. And later, we'll recap the men's and women's opening night basketball wins. All that and more coming up on episode 270 of the Tech Sideline podcast, which starts right now. We welcome you in whether you are listening or watching on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe while you're there, and also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future podcasts. This edition of the Tech Sideline podcast is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference in your overall experience. Visit firstbank.com. Visit www.firstbank.com to learn more. Let's introduce the crew for today. On set, we have Will Stewart, founder and general manager of Tech Sideline across the way. To my right, lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. In the fourth chair is Carter Hill. Behind the scenes producing is Nick Brown, and I'm your host for today, Katie Adams. This week, the Hokies complete their tour of the North Carolina Triangle with a trip down to Durham to take on the Blue Devils, a team that they beat 48-17 last year. Both teams now entered a rebuilding year under first-year head coaches, but Duke's been off to a fast start. They're sitting at 6-3 after they had not won an ACC game in almost 2 years. It's
shocking how good they are. They not only did they go 0-8 last year, but they lost their 8 games by an average of 31.75 points per game. Yep. So Virginia Tech, when Tech beat them by 31 last year, that was your average loss for Duke in the ACC.
Wasn't it Fuente's last game?
It was. He got fired 2 days after it, or the day after.
Sent him out on a high note.
I always thought it was around the Syracuse game for some reason. I guess everyone thought it was going to come.
That's when they decided to fire him. All right, so okay. I learned from Tech people when I was in Atlanta last year that he had already been fired, and they were just negotiating the buyout.
So he knew at the Duke game.
Oh, he knew at the Georgia Tech game, he knew at the Boston College game, and he knew at the Duke game. Yeah.
Okay, this is fresh news to me.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I was looking through the photos from last year's game, and there's Fuente and Cutcliffe hugging each other on the field after the game.
Yeah.
So kept coaching hard to the very end. Yeah.
Well, Mike Elko was not necessarily thought of as a splash hire this offseason. Both Brent Pry and Elko, former defensive coordinators at really respectable schools. Elko coming from A&M under Jimbo Fisher, but really this year this guy has a legitimate chance to be ACC Coach of the Year.
If they win another 1 or 2, it'd be tough to vote against him. I mean, originally Babers was in the driver's seat, but then they lost 3 in a row. You could give it to Mac Brown, but their team is stacked and the Coastal Division is so bad.
Yeah, but the voters don't think that way.
Yeah, I know. Elko's just done such a good job there, though. Not only did he coached under Brian Kelly for a year also at Notre Dame. Yep. He was Dave Clawson's longtime defensive coordinator at Richmond, at Bowling Green, and then at Wake Forest, and then finally left to go to Notre Dame after a year. So he's coached under 3 guys who have won, multiple Coach of the Year awards. So it's a good pedigree there.
Has Duke played Wake this year yet?
They have not.
Hang on, I have their schedule right here.
They have not.
They have not, and they play them at the last game of the year. At Duke. Not that it really matters between Duke and Wake where they're playing.
That'll be a really interesting
though.
Very interesting. A couple teams with probably pretty similar talent levels overall, and 2 coaches who know each other really well.
I didn't realize the tie between both of those coaches, but I think when you think about the fact that Duke was picked last, or preseason they were picked to finish last in the Coastal, now they're 1 spot behind North Carolina. It's I think that gives Mike Elko a pretty decent shot to be Coach of the Year.
Yeah. So it's interesting you come back around to that discussion because I was kind of stuck on it. What about Florida State's coach?
Mike Norvell. Yeah. He also makes a good case.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think they're playing really good football right now. Yeah. Now they just played Miami. If you're halfway competent, it's easy to play good football against Miami,
Absolutely.
I think. I mean, but, again, Duke beat Miami by 24. Or at least 24.
Everybody beats Miami.
Everybody, almost everybody beats Miami. Yes, you could make a case for him. I just think now obviously when you're rock bottom like Duke was last year, I mean, lose all 8 games by over 31 points. I mean, if they had just won like 2 ACC games, it would have been a huge
nice.
improvement. Yeah, so they've come quite a long way. So he's right in the conversation. We've still got a few weeks left, but like if it ended right now, I'd probably vote for Elko. And here's your Elko trivia. Remember the thrilling 0-0 at the end of regulation game at Wake Forest, and the Frank Beamer game. He was the defensive coordinator for Wake Forest.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, who would have shut Virginia Tech out were it not for overtime.
Speaking of the 0-0 game, I was watching South Carolina the other night, and I don't remember what triggered this, but they're cutting away to a commercial, and they show Shane on the sideline, and he literally goes like that, both hands in the air. And now it wasn't 0-0. There was a score in the game at that point, and I'm just like, Shane, no, don't do that.
Chip off the old block.
I was going to say, is this the first time that Mike Elko has seen Virginia Tech since that game? But if he coached at Notre Dame, there's a good chance that he might have played against us.
I forget what year he coached Notre Dame. It might have been
Hill.
Carter,
I got you.
Okay.
It's your moment.
He was at Notre Dame in 2017.
So
no,
we played him in
Was it
2018.
18?
Right.
Correct.
Played him at 16 there and 18 here, and didn't play him in 17.
He did play the Hokies at Bowling Green.
Okay.
2012.
2012. That's right. So he's got plenty of experience coaching against Virginia Tech. Yeah.
Well, at this point, UNC is the clear favorite to win the Coastal right now. Duke is one spot behind them, but it's a shame that UNC is good this year, because I think that it would be a perfect bow to ending Coastal chaos if Duke had won the division this year. The last time they had won it was 2013, and that's when the cycle started where every single Coastal team had been represented in the ACC championship for the last 7 years.
Yeah.
So to end Coastal chaos where it started with Duke, that would have been incredible.
It's a shame that UNC is going to be the final Coastal champions.
I think some crazy things need to happen for Duke to make it in the ACC championship because they haven't secured it yet.
They basically have to win out, and
UNC would have to lose.
Yeah.
Well, Duke missed their chance. UNC beat them 38-35 back on October 15th.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Last second touchdown.
Yeah. So
Duke was
that's
winning that game.
Tall hill to climb.
Yeah.
So this is another one of those Coastal matchups that we bid a farewell to for a year, and then we'll get Duke again in 2024. I was just looking at some general trivia. Do you all know the last time that we lost to Duke in Durham?
Oh my gosh, it had to have been.
I'm going to say
long ago.
early 80s.
I would say early 80s as well.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is not that long ago. Thank you very much.
Katie
could have been born twice since then.
Yes, that is indeed true. You're right on the money. It was 1981.
I was going to guess 82.
And a 14-7 loss. So it has been a really long time. Virginia Tech has controlled this series for a good amount of the time, especially in Blacksburg.
But so they've beaten Tech 3 times since ACC play started. Is that what I read?
I guess so.
So
yeah.
all 3.
They've all been
in Blacksburg. So 2013, when Virginia Tech had 4 turnovers, Thomas threw 4 picks that game, I think. And so did Duke, by the way.
Yes. Duke didn't play well that
was like the ugliest game ever. 8
Right.
combined interceptions, and Duke happened to win. So 2015 in like overtime, double overtime.
Triple overtime.
Triple overtime. Somebody get
yes,
it right.
I
Yeah,
And then 2019, right? No.
yes, 2019.
Yes, 2019.
Yeah. Yep.
Man.
So wow, that's interesting. All
So
right.
yeah, if you're gonna lose to them, at least this time it'll be on the road, and it's on RSN, so not that many people can see it.
It's not even on RSN. It's on ESPN Plus.
No, that's Liberty.
Yes.
You're right. I'm looking a week ahead.
So let's go ahead and talk about this matchup
Really
and some of
poopy network is what RSN stands for.
yes, exactly. You got to get DirecTV. You can get everything. That's
Nick's
my
over there
solution.
giggling.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about this matchup, starting with their quarterback. They're led by Riley Leonard, who is a current sophomore. And his biggest strength is his mobility. He's very much a dual threat guy, which has proven to be a weak spot in the Hokies defense. So unfortunate for that.
Yeah, he started 1 game last year, and that happened to be in Lane Stadium against Virginia Tech. Has made huge strides this year, completing almost 65% of his passes, 6.3 yards per carry, 577 yards, and that includes sacks. So, he can scramble, but so much of his stuff is design runs. A lot of draws that are even seem like they're a little more delayed than most draws, and with the running back is like a lead blocker, and there might be a little bit of RPO element to that as well. But I think it's a creative offense. It gets him running downhill, and he's a big guy at 6'4", and he's got good speed too. I mean, you've seen him with long touchdown runs. I think he hit a 74-yard touchdown run on North Carolina. Not that they're a great defense, but they do have good athletes on defense, and nobody could catch him.
Yep.
And had another long one against BC. So
yeah, the one against Boston College went for 60, and then his career long was a 74.
Yeah, so I put it in our game preview. I actually included the video of the 60-yard run against Boston College. That was really early in the game.
First drive.
Yeah, and what I told people to look for was that when Leonard comes through the line, the BC defenders take their angles and they misjudge him. Mm-hmm. And he gets by him and then he runs away from him. So to drill down into his numbers a little bit, he's listed as the 5th leading rusher in the conference with 577 net yards, but that includes 78 yards lost. The vast majority, which is probably on sacks. So if you add the 78 yards lost, it's not like it shoots him up there, it bumps him up to 4th in the ACC. And you'd have to subtract the yards lost by the tailbacks. I didn't have the time to do all that. You guys mentioned 6.3 yards per carry, 3rd in the conference. And again, that includes the sacks. If you take the sacks out, it bumps him up to 7.2 yards per carry, which is like, I think, 2nd in the conference behind somebody from FSU or something like that. So you call him a dual threat? I'm not sure he's a dual threat. He's definitely a running threat. You know, not to denigrate his passing ability, but the running part of it is what worries me.
He's the second most dangerous quarterback Virginia Tech has faced this year, besides Drake May.
Yes, I was just gonna mention that, whose Heisman chances got a lot better this weekend after some great quarterbacks had some okay games.
Right.
Less than okay.
Yeah.
Well, Riley Leonard can certainly use his legs, but he doesn't necessarily have to, because he's got a pretty darn good trio of running backs to help him out, most notably Jordan Waters with 8 touchdowns on the year.
Yeah, he's having a good year. Gosh, him and Riley have combined for 17 touchdowns. But then they've got Jaquez Moore, who's had a good year. They've got Jalen Coleman, who's had a good year. He's missed his last 4 games, but started practicing before the BC game, so he could come back this week. And, you know, all 3 of those guys, like none of them is like an elite running back, but they're all good running backs, and they all have decent size. It's just they come at you kind of in waves at running back, and their offensive line is quite good as well. Their running game is 21st in the country in yards per game. Before, let's see, the only other top 50 running team Virginia Tech has faced was Pitt.
And we know what happened there.
We all know what happened.
Izzy Abanikanda is a top 50
no, they
rushing
don't have.
team
I don't
by
think they don't
himself.
have anybody as good as him. But like, that was all Pitt had, was that one guy.
Yep.
Duke will come at you in waves.
Yeah, so going from Waters through Jaquez Moore through Jalen Coleman, their carries are 94, 58, and 58. Mm-hmm. They average 4.9 with 8 touchdowns, 6.8 with 4 touchdowns, 5.3 with 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So we've been sitting here the last few weeks, and I've been remarking on how the leading rushers for the other teams against NC State and the last opponent, how they didn't have many touchdowns. These guys got touchdowns. So and those are really good rushing averages, like you say.
So you said the last time we faced a good rushing offense, it didn't go well for the Hokies. Mm-hmm. So this could be another long day. I wanted to point out the fact, did y'all see, I mean, we keep letting guys break all sorts of records here. Did you see the fact that Zach Pyron was indeed ACC Rookie of the Week this week?
Of course he was. Of course he was. And he wasn't even very good until the 4th quarter.
Yeah.
In fact, he wasn't any good until the 4th quarter.
It's funny because him and MJ Morris are actually co-ACC Rookies of the Week.
Oh, well,
so
we jump-started a couple careers there, didn't we?
Makes you feel good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Breaking all sorts of records for the wrong reason, except for Tucker Holloway last week.
Thank you, Tucker Holloway.
That is our saving grace. Well, the key to this game lies in Virginia Tech's ability to make Duke one-dimensional and force them into some really uncomfortable positions by having to throw the ball more than relying on their run game, you would say.
I think so. I don't think they have that much talent at wide receiver. I think they're getting the most out of the ability that they have at wide receiver.
Which will be a recurring theme throughout the whole team, getting the most out of what they have.
Yeah. Jalen Calhoun has been is a good receiver for him. He's had a good career. Jordan Moore has caught 32 passes for him as a sophomore, and the crazy thing about Moore is he was a quarterback last year. So they've moved him to wide receiver, and they've still gotten 32 catches.
Moore actually played quarterback.
He rushed for 117 yards against Virginia Tech last year.
Again, looking through the photos, right. I'm like, who's number 8?
And, right, and now here we are, almost a year to the day later, and
So wait, did Riley Leonard start, and then
yeah,
that guy
and
got brought
they
in?
were
or
splitting.
something?
They were splitting time.
Okay.
I heard one Gunner. What's his name? Because I think he was in our
Oh,
pictures from
yes.
last year.
He was
Gunner-
supposed to be very good last year.
Gunner. Where is it?
What do you?
I guess he had graduated.
Or did I look? Did I look 2 or 3 years ago? It all
No, I
runs
think
together.
that sounds right.
What are we talking about?
Carter,
Gunnar
you know?
Holmberg.
I'm talking about.
Yes.
I'm talking about. They played 2 quarterbacks against Tech last year.
We're having a completely different conversation.
Gunnar Holmberg, who is now playing for FIU down in Miami.
Uh-huh.
So he transferred
He
from
transferred,
Duke
yeah, he's
to
no longer
FIU
there.
this
But
past
was he at
offseason.
Duke last year, and did he play against Tech last
I don't know if
year?
he.
Let's see.
I know Riley Leonard started the game, and then I know Jordan Moore came in and rushed for 113 yards. I don't think there's room enough for a third quarterback in there, but I could be
know.
wrong.
Well, Virginia Tech has played at least 3 quarterbacks in the game. We know that, so maybe that was the case.
So to explain to everybody that I'm not out of my mind, I go into the media library and I search on Duke looking for photos to include in this year's preview. So it just kind of mashes everything together. So if I've seen Gunnar Holmberg or whatever his name is, it could have been from
That's probably where
previous
you came
years.
from. I don't remember if he was on the team.
So what's the answer, Carter?
He did not play last year.
All right, so
No,
it
he
was,
did
it
not
was
play.
an old photo I was looking at. Gotcha.
Okay.
Well, you brought up the wide receivers. This wide receiver room is led by a familiar coach and former Virginia Tech assistant, Zon Burden. I believe he coached running backs most of his tenure here and then spent a year with the receivers, though.
His first year here, he coached wide receivers. He coached Cam Phillips and Isaiah Ford in 2015.
Nice.
So he replaced Aaron Moorhead after Aaron. And I forget where Moorhead went when he. I know
Did
he's
go
with
to
the
Texas
Eagles.
A&M?
A&M.
Yeah.
That's right. And now he's with the Eagles. So Zon Burden replaced him as a wide receivers coach for a year. And then Fuente was hired, and Holtman Wiggins was the wide receivers coach. And that's when Burden became the running back coach. Because they wanted to keep Burden for 757 recruiting purposes. And but obviously they wanted to bring Wiggins too, because Wiggins is a great coach, and they were coaching the same position. So that means somebody had to coach a different position.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously, Holman Wiggins panned out very well. I feel like he's probably one of those coaches that could be on the rise for getting a potential head coaching job
Absolutely.
very soon. He's been at Alabama for several years now.
Oh gosh, yeah, 19, 20, 20. This is his 4th year at Alabama, and he keeps getting promoted and raises too.
And who was the O-line coach who I think is now the offensive coordinator at BYU?
I think he's at Baylor now, right?
Jeff Grimes.
Jeff
Jeff
Grimes.
Grimes, yeah.
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 Is he OC
Oh yeah.
at
Okay,
Baylor?
so this is a total this was back at Beamer's tenure when.
Oh, yeah.
He was only here for a year.
I'm just throwing stuff out.
Okay, well, but anyway, that was a really good staff, by the way.
Yes.
All right, Loeffler is now a head coach, and he was the offensive coordinator. Shane is now a head coach. Aaron Moorhead is now in the NFL, and Grimes is now a very successful offensive coordinator. So that was like the 2013 staff.
So we're going to see TV announcers talking about the Beamer coaching tree. Charlie's killing it down
Maybe
at
not so
NC
much.
State.
Yes. Very true. So Zon Burden back in the ACC after a 1-year stint at Maryland last year, where he had the privilege of coaching in the Pinstripe Bowl against Virginia Tech. Now he gets to coach against Virginia Tech again in back-to-back years. His most notable receiver is Jalen Calhoun, though, like you said.
I want to say, like, they've done such a good job. They lost their best 2 offensive players last year. They lost a 1,200-yard rusher, Mateo Durant.
So could he have come back? Like, did he transfer somewhere? Or?
No, he tried to go to the NFL and didn't make it.
Right.
I think he was eligible to come back, but I'm not certain. And then they lost Jake Bobo, who caught 74 passes. So which makes me wonder how the heck they actually managed to go 0-8 last year when they had 2 really good players like that. But Bobo's having a great year at UCLA, and then they lost him and a 1,200-yard rusher, and they're still so much better than they were. They lost their 2 best players, but they improved so much across the board. Like this is like
Duke's to the point where they're just reloading every year.
Right. But like this is like a historically good coaching job when you consider everything about Duke, what they were last year and who they lost.
So this group of Duke wide receivers isn't necessarily dominant, but like you said, Will, and like you said, Chris, their coaches have really been able to get the most out of this talent. Not a ton of tight end threats at all. Okay.
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, it's not bad, but you're not going to be good everywhere when you're Duke, I would say. Yeah.
Particularly when you run the ball as well as they do. You were talking about making them one-dimensional. I'd try to figure out how to make their running game one-dimensional. Like, are you going to scheme to take away the quarterback run, which is really difficult, or are you going to scheme to take away the tailback runs? I imagine it's hard to do both.
When you're a one-gap defense like Virginia Tech, that's the whole point of running a one-gap defense. Is everybody just covers up the gap and it doesn't matter. I mean, You're scheming against the gaps.
You learn all the time on the Tech Sideline podcast.
Absolutely.
Now, to me, it's like whether you bring up an extra safety in the box and go and do more man coverage on the outside. I'd be more inclined to do that, to be honest with you, because
it's a good point.
They just lost one of their starting wide receivers for the season. Their only big wide receiver. He's 6'3", 205, and I'm blanking on his name, but so I think Calhoun's solid.
Probably Eli. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. Pancol, Pancol.
I believe that was it. Yeah. So I just don't think they have great wide receiver play, and I would feel better with the safety in the box
against the run.
Than I would. I'll take my chances with Mansour Delane versus Jordan Moore than I will stopping the run with just 7 guys in the box.
There you go. Chris has got the game plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you want to make them more one-dimensional, obviously, Riley Leonard is very well protected by his offensive line, and the running backs have been able to generate, or the offensive line has been able to generate some really great holes for the running backs. I want to get into that offensive line, but first, I want to throw it over to Carter.
Scott Glessner, as always, came ready to go.
Money.
Stat time with Scott Glessner.
It is upside down, version. Carter.
And it's upside down.
There we go.
Correct.
Stat time with Scott Glessner. Virginia Tech has allowed 18 sacks in their last 4 games.
Ugh.
The last time they allowed that many in a 4-game stretch were the 4 November games in 2012. During Virginia Tech's 6-game losing streak, Virginia Tech has only averaged 62.8 offensive plays per game, and their opponents are averaging 74.7 offensive plays per game. Speaking of Bowling Green from earlier, Virginia Tech has also been held scoreless in the first quarter in the last 3 games. The last time that happened was in 2012 in the Pitt, Bowling Green, of course, with Mike Elko, and Cincinnati games.
So I guess you'd say there's a good chance that we are held scoreless in the first quarter for this game.
Ooh, we'll see.
With Mike Elko scheming it up. And
We'll talk about Duke's defense later.
Yes.
I think they're strong except for corner, and they're awful at corner. But anyway, so basically what you just told me is for the last 4 games, we gave up as many sacks as we did in a 4-game stretch under Kurt Newsom, which is basically our worst offensive line period ever. So we're having our worst offensive line period in 10 years. With Wisconsin's offensive line coach. It just doesn't make any sense.
And so the thing is, you're not running a lot of offensive plays, and yet you're still giving up a lot of sacks.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech has also won 9 straight in Durham, dating back to 1981. So way to do your prep, Katie.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll
Scott
see.
came ready to go.
We'll see what happens this week. Want to talk about the offensive line. A big reason why Duke has been able to kind of make this big turnaround in year 1 is because they took so many transfers. They took 7 going into this year. Obviously, Virginia Tech has taken 4. Not all of them have contributed in a positive way. But 3 of those transfers that they took at the beginning of the year were offensive linemen, and all of their success has translated really well to their year 1 at Duke. Chris, what do you know about those 3?
They have their left guard, Chance Lytle, came from Colorado. Jack Burns, their center, came from an Ivy League school, actually. I think it was either Harvard or Cornell.
So not hard for him to get admitted to Duke.
No, clearly not. And he's played really well. And then Andre Harris, their right tackle, I believe, came from Arkansas State. And that they've really helped to solidify them and give them depth and everything like that. Their best player up front is their left tackle, Graham Burton, who is the best offensive lineman Virginia Tech will see all season.
Being the roster card guy, here's what I noticed about looking at their offensive line. They're kind of an oddball offensive line. Their tackles are 6'4" and 6'5", and their guards are both 6'7".
Yeah,
you don't see that very often.
Yeah, you don't see that very often. Barton's interesting. Like last year, he had the exact same grade on PFF as Parker Clements, and basically a 73.
Mid-low 70s.
74, 73, 74. This year, he's at 87, which is an elite level, and Parker Clements is at a 44, excuse me. So Clements has dropped by 30 points from last year, while Barton has improved by 16 points. They were the same player last year, and they've both gone in opposite directions.
And then another note on Barton, I believe you said in the preview that he's the 3rd highest graded offensive tackle in the country.
Yes,
at an
correct.
87, yeah.
So he's not quite Darrisaw level, I don't think, as far as the grades, but he's very, very close. Like I said, he's only given up 6 pressures all season, and 3 of them came last week, surprisingly enough, against Boston College, but I doubt he'll have a game like that twice in a row.
Well, you got to credit this offensive line for being a big reason as to why Riley Leonard has been so dominant on the ground, as well as their rushing attack. You can't always have one without the other. A former head coach taking over this unit obviously plays a big part in that.
Yeah. They've got an offensive line coach who is a former head coach, I believe, at Eastern Illinois. Didn't do such a great job there, but he was at Northwestern as their offensive line coach and tight ends coach and coaching a bunch of different positions.
Everything except for
yeah,
the line.
For like 16 years. And then the offensive coordinator is very, very experienced. So it's just a ton of experience on the Duke's offensive staff. Just a lot of guys who know what they're doing. I think they did a great job in the transfer portal. Like when you bring in 3 offensive linemen in the transfer portal and they all start, like that's a great job. Virginia Tech, I mean, Pride did multiple interviews last December and last January up through the spring where he's like, we really want to get an offensive lineman in the transfer portal. We couldn't get one. We couldn't even get one to visit. And Duke got 3 to commit, and they're all starting. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons that they've made such a big improvement.
Yeah, and I think somebody said on the message board that their offensive defensive coordinators are average age of 47 years old, and at Tech, both guys are 33 years old.
Yeah, and their offensive coordinator's been an offensive coordinator at like 4 different schools, and like Katie said, he's coached every position except for offensive line.
Yeah,
just tremendous amount of experience on their staff.
One note about Duke's 7 transfers, all 7 of them were grad transfers, so all 7 of them come with a degree. Coming into Duke, and so they've obviously played several years, I guess 3 or 4 at their previous school, and so all that experience kind of adds up to and has translated very well to their time at Duke. I guess you kind of think about our transfers, Stephen Gosnell didn't have a degree yet. I don't think Grant Wells had a degree yet.
No, he's going to graduate this spring, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Jason Brown was a grad transfer, and then Feldarius Payne was also a grad transfer.
I believe he was, and Jaden Blue should be also. Good for all those transfers for Duke. That means they get to go to Duke and probably get a master's degree from Duke.
Yeah.
If they decide to.
So all very experienced guys coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And team-wide, 6 of the 7 guys. How many of them did you say start, Chris?
Well, I think all but one of them start. Yeah. But one of them's like a backup linebacker, but he still played like 250 snaps, so he's a rotational guy. And he's I believe another Ivy League guy.
And 6 of the 7 have, at least looking at PFF grades, have graded out well.
The only one is the guy you would think would actually grade out well. Well, we'll talk about their defense, I guess, in the second half. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Duke's offensive line, it reminds me of our offensive line and the last time that we played on the road where they committed 10 false starts at NC State. I hope that it's not similar. You would think that a Duke game at noon is not as ruckus of an environment as Carter Finley at night, but it really wasn't that loud, Will. You mentioned it when I was there. I thought the same thing. I was expecting it to be way louder, but still the penalties played a big role.
All you got to do at Duke is roll out there at noon and stay awake, because there's not a lot of people there. And the weather should be good. I think it's going to rain the day before, but I think on game day it's going to be good.
The loudest noises might be like groans from Virginia Tech fans.
I know last time we played at Duke, there's that awesome picture of Dalton Keene scoring a touchdown, and it's like all maroon and orange on one side.
That was right in front of me. That was awesome. It was such a great play.
That was quite the play.
Yeah.
I know I'm still planning on traveling to this game, but I think for a lot of other Hokies fans, it's probably not going to be the same turnout as it was in that year, just with the current state of things. But I would still hope there'd be a lot of
Tech fans have been hanging in there so far.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of fans in that area that went to Virginia Tech. So, I'm not going to drive down from Blacksburg for it, but there will be people in the Raleigh-Durham area.
Well, Malcolm lives down there, and he's going to go to the game with
He's going to go, exactly.
Awesome.
Former podcast producer, Malcolm.
Yep.
Yes,
Nick's
he's related,
going.
Stuart.
So,
man. There.
So 50% of this room is actually going to the game. Carter, are you going?
I am going.
Okay, so over 50% is going.
Well, looking at Duke's offense as a whole, they're now scoring 34.8 points per game. And then there's another stat that I wanted you to expand on, Chris. They're 44th in FEI offense after last year's 123rd. That's a massive jump.
FEI is an efficiency-based offense. I don't necessarily like total yards. The total yards rankings and everything like that. And I've written a lot of inside the numbers on why. So like FEI and available yards and things like that, I look at that. But yeah, they've made massive jumps. And some of it's a lot of it's because they improved their offensive line with the 3 transfers, plus Barton's gotten a lot better. But at the same time, they lost their best receiver and their best running back at the same time. So there's been some good input, but there was some they had some guys leave too. So I just think it's an exceptional coaching job.
Well, I
by
know
their
that there's a
staff.
lot of Hokies watching this and listening to this, and by the time it's over, you're going to be mad at us for talking.
I know,
Duke up
and
like
I'm
this.
not saying this.
But when you do your research, it's really impressive.
I'm not trying to compare them to the Tech staff. I'm just talking about Duke is Duke.
Yeah.
They've done an outstanding job. They've done about as good a job you can do, I think.
And if you can't listen to all this and acknowledge that, then
Yeah.
just keep listening.
is
We
what
love
it
you.
is.
Keep hanging in there.
Yeah.
It is what it is. We'll see how we fare on Saturday. That's going to wrap up the first half. But before we break, I want to throw it back over to Carter.
Well, I want to take another trip down memory lane to the last time the Hokies went down to Wallace Wade Stadium in Durham, the COVID game back in 2020. It was also the Khalil Herbert game. 358 all-purpose yards that
Wow,
day,
that's right.
which is the school record. 19 carries for 207 yards, good for 10.9 yards per carry.
Oh, my God.
And 2 touchdowns. He also had a big kick return,
He
I
did,
believe,
like
too.
down to the 5-yard line.
Yes, almost scored. Somebody else had 2 rushing touchdowns for the Hokies that day. Do you know who that was?
Man,
No, it's not Raheem Blackshear, Chris. I know.
I know it's not Raheem Blackshear.
I'm going to guess Trey Turner.
Ah,
Jet sweep, baby.
Braxton Burmeister.
Braxton Burmeister scored 2 on the ground.
Okay.
So he's now San Diego State's third string receiver.
Yeah.
The attendance for that game also was 0.
Zero.
Such
The
a
state of North
shame that
Carolina-
Khalil Herbert didn't
Yeah.
get to play in
I
front of
never
fans.
saw him get to play a game in person.
Yeah.
The state
I
of
was
North-
in the press box for some Khalil Herbert stuff.
I
but it's
know
not
his
the same.
highlights on Sundays sometimes are awfully impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and hey, props to Raheem Blackshear on his first
Yes.
career touchdown this past week and his 4 catches for 40 yards. Imagine, you give a guy the ball more than twice in a game. what happens?
66-yard kick return
Yeah.
as well.
He's a good
Oh, my
player.
God. Yeah.
He's a good player.
Who's he with? The Bills?
No, he's with the Panthers.
Panthers.
The Bills put him
The
on the
Bills
practice
had
squad.
him, yeah.
They put him on the practice squad. The Panthers signed him off their practice squad.
One of the main things I remember from that last time we played in Durham was seeing like all the cardboard cutout faces in the background because they were doing that at
Oh,
their
that's
games.
right. Yeah.
We never did it at football.
We
did.
They did it at Tech.
I thought they just
had
did
cardboard.
it at basketball for Tech, but they did it for
Oh,
football.
they did it for
they
some
did
for
it in
football as well. What I'll always remember about the COVID year at Tech was like, a Tech player would make a catch for like a 15-yard gain, and then they'd pipe in the crowd noise, but it would come over the audio like 5 seconds after the play.
Right.
So it always just sounded.
Then they'd
really,
forget
really
to turn it
strange.
off. And
Yeah.
and they'd put it on another.
It's like you don't have to turn this on. Just
A crazy time to even think back that was
yes.
even real.
Let's not.
I wish that we could have Khalil Herbert for a year that there was
Yes.
fans or just another year after that, but doing good things in the NFL. All right, that's going to lead us into our break here on episode 270 of the Tech Sideline podcast presented by First Bank and Trust. Talked a lot about this run game heavy Duke offense in the first half, and on the other side, we'll take a look at their defense and how Coach Elko has turned that around. Make sure you stay with us. We'll be right back. We welcome you back into episode 270 of the Tech Sideline podcast presented by First Bank and Trust. As a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, continue to drop any questions that you have for Will and Chris, and they'll answer them at the end of the show. Shifting to the defense, you would expect it to be good given Coach Elko's expertise. We talked about a transfer-led offensive line, but really the majority of the portal guys that they took are on defense. Last week, we faced a Georgia Tech team who ranks second in the country in forced turnovers. And this week, we get to face Duke, who ranks third in the country in forced turnovers. Who would have thought that?
Right. Well, obviously, the one game against Miami helps. I think Miami had, 8 turnovers in that game?
That's true.
That was quite bad. But yeah, I mean, Duke's well coached. I think they finished dead last year in defense.
That's what I was going to say. It's the most surprising stat that they rank third in the country because last year they finished 131st in the country in the same stat.
Dead last in defense last year. I mean, they're still below average by overall standards this year, but they've improved by 50 spots. I mean, they're just their improvement has been incredible on that side of the ball as well. I think generally speaking, they've been good against the run, and they'll make some tackles for loss. Their weakness is at cornerback, but they don't get even though they'll give up some yards, they don't give up very many points. So they're kind of a bend but don't break to a certain extent.
So let me clarify something with you, Katie, because I wrote in the preview that Duke is number 3 in the nation in turnover margin. Are they also?
Did I mix these up? No, I meant turnover margin.
Okay.
Yep.
So not
right.
not necessarily forced turnovers,
Yes,
which also
turnover
wouldn't
margin.
surprise
My
me.
bad.
But so the difference there is Duke is plus 1.56 per game. Thank you, Miami. And Virginia Tech is minus 0.89. So you add those together, and that's an aggregate turnover margin of 2.45 per game in Duke's favor. Can't do that.
Yeah, it definitely, makes you worry given, what happened last week and the amount of turnovers that we had.
I mean, Tech didn't have any margin for error if they wanted to beat NC State and Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
And Duke, they definitely don't have any margin of error to beat Duke. I think Duke is one of those teams that I think maybe their record is a little better than they actually should be, but they get the most out of the players that they do have, and they don't go out and make silly mistakes and things like that. They're just a smart, well-coached football team.
So before we continue with the defense, let's give some context to people. They beat Temple 30-0. Northwestern.
They beat Quincy Patterson and Jafar Williams in week 1, 30-0. Except Quincy was not starting that game at all.
Also known as the Temple Owls.
Yes.
They beat Northwestern, who's having a terrible year.
They have not won on American soil this year.
They lost to Kansas. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your comments are awesome. I'll slow down a little bit so you can put them in. They lost to Kansas when Kansas was busy getting out to that 5-0 start.
Yeah, and that was a really close game.
They still are pretty good. They're bowl eligible after this year. They tore down their goalpost this past week after beating Oklahoma State.
It'll be their first bowl game since 2008.
And so for Kansas, that's a really big deal.
It is.
Then they beat UVA 38-17. Now, the oddball is that they lost to – I left out the North Carolina A&T game.
Yeah.
The oddball is that they lost to Georgia Tech, right after Georgia Tech had fired their coach. They lost to them.
Sometimes that can be a good thing because, if the new coach comes in and does some new things and breaks tendencies, then all that tape you have on them becomes kind of irrelevant overnight.
It's still a bad loss, but Georgia Tech was definitely playing really inspired football that week.
It seemed more like a bad loss at the time than it does now.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia Tech's 4-5 now. Mm-hmm. They've won 3 games since they changed coaches.
And then they lost to UNC at home again. What does it matter? 38-35. I would argue that's one of their best performances.
Absolutely.
Didn't UNC score with maybe 16 seconds left or something like that?
Of course, a Drake May-led comeback at the end of the game. And UNC is one of the most puzzling teams in America because they've had so many close games. Almost every single one of their games have been close down to the wire, even with teams like Georgia State and Appalachian State. But the thing about them is that they find a way to win. They're 8-1.
Yeah. So they're the opposite of Virginia Tech. And I say that not to take a shot at Virginia Tech, but sometimes that's the way things go. Because we're not going to sit here and say that North Carolina is an awesomely coached team. No. I don't think that's why they're winning all those close games. I think they're just having that year.
I think they have more talent than every team they've played except Notre Dame. And so the only team, there are only 2 games that haven't been close were when they blew us out and then when Notre Dame blew them out. Yep. Everything else for Carolina has been a pretty close game.
I think so.
You are correct. I'm scanning their results, and
But anyway,
Yes, they're all close.
But anyway.
Well, they beat Pitt 42-24, so it's kind of
But they, I
That
mean,
was close.
even
In the
that
fourth
game
quarter. Start of
took
the
a
fourth
huge
quarter.
comeback for
Yeah.
North Carolina because
Yeah.
they got down by like 2 or 3 touchdowns.
yeah.
So then they blew up. Duke blew up Miami 45-21. Miami had 8 turnovers that day. Is that right?
That was yes, that's right. The crazy thing is, all right, so Duke's winning at halftime, but then Miami scores the first 2 touchdowns of the third quarter, and you're like, oh, Miami finally woke up. They're going to run away with this one, and Duke took their haymaker and then just threw their own haymaker and landed it. Yep.
And then last Friday night in a game that I watched, I would argue it was one of Duke's worst performances of the year. They beat Boston College 38-31, so that was close to a not good Boston College team.
Yeah,
They were playing a backup quarterback at BC, but Zay
They were
Flowers.
well. He played
pretty
great.
well, though,
he played
yeah.
great.
Yes.
Yeah, he played better than Dracovic had played this year.
What is the deal with that? Is Phil Dracovic hurt?
That's a good
Again,
question.
I guess.
You watched
He
it.
was standing on the sideline. Of course,
Was
I
he in
wasn't
sweats?
listening to audio. We had some friends over and we were hanging out, but he was standing on the sideline, not in uniform. Jerkovic
Okay.
was.
Oh, so I guess he's hurt.
The most puzzling year for ACC quarterbacks ever. So is Tyler Van Dyke done? Like, has he been pulled until further notice? Like, is he a
It's hard to say what's
QB2?
going on in Miami.
I know. I don't
They're
keep
all
up on
making
much
bank.
Miami football, but I know that Van Dyke has not been the guy.
So I
I
returned.
know. I know he got hurt at one point, but
Yeah.
I don't know if he's out now because of that. Or I don't think it matters who Miami puts in at quarterback. They're just not very good.
Well,
And I know Van Dyke is better than he's played this year. I mean, because he played well last year.
yeah. All right. So I returned the podcast back to you and talking about the Duke defense.
Yes, let's get back to the Duke defense. To acknowledge the success of that defense, it really starts with Dwayne Carter, who leads the team in tackles for loss and sacks.
Yes, he'll come straight up the middle against Virginia Tech. So the guards in the center will have to be there. I think he's got nine tackles for loss thereabouts.
Yep.
And this is a Duke team that I think ranks 24th in tackles for loss in the country. So, if somebody gets penetration against Tech, it's probably going to be him.
You said, Chris, though, the good thing for the Hokies is that they've done a better job of stopping penetration.
They have. If you just throw out the sacks and you just look at the runs by the Virginia Tech running backs over the last 4 games, they only have one carry where they lost a yard, and that was a minus 1 yard loss.
that's
So
really
so
impressive.
that they've stopped allowing penetration against the run. So that is some improvement we've seen from the Virginia Tech offense.
And there's a fairly new Twitter account I follow called Hokies Film. I don't know what the username is, but that's the name that displays. And he put together, I'm pretty sure it was every single run by the tailbacks in the last game against Georgia Tech. And I mean, it looked good. It was a lot of open space up the middle, so you're right.
Shaka Hayward, another guy on that defensive line who's contributed a lot. Both him and Dwayne Carter represented Duke in Charlotte for ACC Media Days. And then a defensive end in RJ Oben. These 3 guys that we've talked about so far are all people who have carried over from last year, and they've really just been developed at a high level.
Yeah, just all much improved players from a year ago. I mean, they're playing at a high level, making a lot of tackles for loss, and just playing positive football this year. Just look at their PFF scores, and then just honestly just look at Duke's defensive performance. It matches up with the improvement in their grades. Yeah. So, I mean, Tech's going to have their hands full. I think they can move the football on Duke, but it'll probably be more on the outside than it would be up the middle.
One of those defensive transfers who's made a big impact is Darius Joyner, a defensive back who came from Western Illinois. I believe he started his career at Jacksonville State,
Jacksonville State. That's right.
Leads the team in tackles.
Yeah, so they've got a couple of Ivy League players and then another FCS player that have all come in and made big impacts for them. And
so I guess if we go into the portal this offseason, don't necessarily bat your eyes at guys coming from the smaller schools and not coming from UNC and Marshall and Nebraska.
You've got to get your evaluation right, and then when you get there, you got to coach them up.
Yep.
And Duke clearly did that.
Now, the main part of this defense, which you talked about earlier, is their struggles at cornerback. I know last week Zay Flowers exploited that room pretty good.
Yeah, Datron Young, he's a transfer from Iowa State, and he actually played pretty well at Iowa State.
So you would think that would have been like the best transfer that they
you would have thought.
But you'd be wrong.
But he actually has played worse at Duke this year than he did for Matt Campbell at Iowa State. He's not a very big guy, so I don't know as much about how games are called in the Big 12. Well, actually, I do know how games are called in the Big 12 as opposed to the ACC. They'll let you. He's a small corner, and they'll let wide receivers I don't know. It's just it seems like it's more physical, like between the wide receiver and the defensive back in the ACC, and he's only 5'9". He's basically my size. Got maybe 5 pounds on me. That's it.
179.
Yep, and so he's not having a good year. So that could be part of it. Just the different styles of games from both leagues.
Yeah.
So given the cornerback struggles, I guess they've maybe benched a couple guys now. They've started to rotate in Chandler Rivers, who I believe is a true freshman, started the last 2 games, and he's been a little bit improved.
Yeah, he has been. Just overall more consistent performances this year, especially over the last 2 games. So they're kind of like Virginia Tech. Their best cornerback is a true freshman. Although he's not as good as Mansour Delane, though. He's solid, but he's not as good as Delane. Basically, Datron Young and their other starting corner, Joshua Pickett. I don't want not to pick on anybody, but I want to put it in comparisons. Both of those guys have played at Breon Murray level this year. So I feel very confident that a guy like Caleb Smith can have a good game, but
And if you want to talk about keys to the game for Virginia Tech, it's Caleb Smith.
Well, he has to have a good game,
yes,
right? Because and ideally we have we need to have a second receiver have a big game too. Thing is, if Duke wants to protect, they could protect whatever corner is lined up over Caleb Smith by playing bracket coverage with a safety. If they feel like Virginia Tech's other wide receivers aren't good enough to beat them on the other side of the field. So you could go man on one side of the field, even if you've got a bad corner over there, but you don't feel like Tech's wide receivers are good enough to beat him, then you could use bracket coverage on Caleb Smith on the other side. So I'll be interested to see how Duke
then what
plays
do you counter that? Do you throw to the tight end, throw to the back out of the backfield? Because Tech threw to the back out of the backfield a lot last week.
It depends on the type of coverage they're in.
Out of it.
It depends on the type of coverage.
So you would hope that Caleb Smith plays as well as he did at NC State, or probably even better, but it's really going to be huge to see if anyone else from that wide receiver room steps up.
I think this is one of those games where, like, if Tech had a second wide receiver, I'd be like, man, we're going to score some points in this game. Yeah. But they don't. We don't. So if the Hokies do have a second wide receiver step up in this game, then, I think things would have the potential to get interesting.
Still got an APB out on Christian Moss. Would love to see him step up again.
Right. It would be nice to have someone that complements Caleb Smith so he doesn't necessarily feel all the pressure. I'm sure he loves the level that he's performing at right now and the fact that he's having such great games, but it'd be nice to have some of the pressure at least taken off of him and that another guy that is complimentary in that wide receiver room. One note on linebackers, they brought in a pretty good one in Cam Dillon from Columbia, another interesting school.
Another Ivy League. Yep. And it's funny, the one offensive lineman Tech did pursue in the portal this past year was a guy from Cornell, I believe.
I remember that.
And so like, I think 2 Cornell offensive linemen hit the portal and signed with Power 5 schools. Now, the guy Tech went after ended up at Penn State, and quite frankly, he hasn't been very good. So the one Tech went after hasn't been very good, but the ones that went everywhere else have been good. But
I'm doing a wellness check on Cornell football.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. They didn't bring in like massive amounts of transfers, but the ones they did bring in were key. Yeah. And with the exception of Datron Young at cornerback, they've been good.
Yep.
Cornell's 4-4 overall, 1-4 in the Ivy League.
Maybe should have retained some of those offensive.
Should have kept those offensive linemen.
So looking at their defense as a whole, they've pretty much improved in like almost every single statistical category. Last year, they were giving up almost 40 points per game. That number's pretty much been cut in half. Now they're giving up just 23 through 9 games.
Yeah, and so they bend but don't break, and it helps when you can go out and force 8 turnovers in one game. That'll help you out. So I don't know. You just look up and down, and it's really hard to find a spot where they aren't better than they were last year. They're better across the board pretty much everywhere this season. They don't have a 1,200-yard rusher, but honestly, of the running backs they do have, like if it wasn't 3 of them, maybe they would have a 1,200-yard rusher.
Quick note on special teams. We don't necessarily know who's going to be their starting kicker. I guess they started one guy at the beginning of the year, and then Coach Elko had some interesting comments about it. Now a true freshman walk-on has played the last 2 games, but he's only attempted 2 kicks. So
Charlie Ham, he wasn't having a great year, but Elko said it's a personal reason, has nothing to do with his performance. So, they've started, I believe it's Todd Polino.
Yes.
And he's 2 for 2, but hasn't really tried any from long distance or anything. So there's just not a big sample size now. Where it could make a difference is Ham is really good at his kickoffs. I think he's 32 out of 42 kickoffs have gone for a touchback, whereas Polino, it's been a much smaller percentage. So Virginia Tech, if they can get their kickoff return blocking together, which they haven't done all year.
Colbeck's listed number 1 at kickoff returner this week, right?
Yeah, I believe he is, but it doesn't matter who's returning if there's no blocking, and there hasn't been any blocking all year.
It doesn't matter with everybody else. With Colbeck, it just doesn't matter if you're blocking or not because he's awesome.
Well, he returned 2 last week.
I'm being silly.
You're being from Blacksburg.
Stars are lining up.
Yes. Blacksburg High School alumni stand up. But yeah, I wanted to shift the conversation to our special teams now that we've talked about theirs, and the fact that Tucker Holloway is supposed to start this week, but there's still opportunity for him to redshirt, as Brent Price said.
Ooh, it is. And I've actually written an article that is partially dedicated to this, which will run tomorrow. I am a big believer in giving people what they earned, and he has earned that punt return job. Now, that being said, he's going to help us more in 2026 than he is for the last 3 games of 2022. Can't go to a bowl game this year, right? We don't know where we'll be as a program in 2026. I like to think we'll be better than 2-7 at this point in 2026, though.
So he's played 3 games so far, right?
Correct. He can
It's
play.
hard to believe. I feel like he's played in more.
He played 5 snaps against Wofford, and boy, I wish we could have that one back because that was pointless to begin with.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second because if he plays. You said
Duke's got a really
Duke's coverage is good, so he may just stand back there and catch punts, which would be a waste.
They've only allowed 52 yards worth of returns this year, and only 10 returns total. So almost all of their punts are fair caught.
Right.
So it's almost going to be like he's going to get to the 4-game mark this week just with his hand in the air doing that, kind of like the NC State game, right? Yep. All he did is sit back there and fair catch it. If you're going to play him in one more game, I would play him against UVA because they give up like 13 yards per return, and they punt a lot because their offense is so bad. Duke doesn't punt nearly as much, and they do a great job covering punts. So it seems like if you want to use him in one more game and still be able to redshirt him, you got to have a higher impact. It's a more winnable game, and UVA's punt coverage team isn't as good, and they punt a lot.
Yeah.
And Virginia Tech has many analysts on their staff who should be in Coach Pry's ear telling them exactly that. Now, if he incorporates into the offensive game plan, that's different.
I would. He's earned it, so I'd leave it up to him. I mean, I think when somebody earns it,
yes.
If he wants to redshirt, I'd tell him that I think it's in his best interest, his best interest, and in the program's best interest. But I'd leave it up to him because I'm not going to take playing time away from someone who's earned it. I do think though, if he decides, I want to go ahead and play as the punt returner, I would find a way to, if you just get him in there somehow on offense, and don't give him a lot to think about because he's a guy who a lot of his career was playing quarterback and not necessarily wide receiver, so he's a bit raw.
Yeah, David's getting ready to do an article on Tucker. He talked to Tucker's dad, and just in some text that David told us this morning that Tucker was a jack of all trades in high school. So you're right, he doesn't have a lot of experience at any particular position, especially where he's playing right now.
But I don't want to look at the roster next year and say our true sophomore receiver has only 5 snaps as a wide receiver in whatever our record is going to end up being this year. Right. Let's say we go 3-9. That will seem like kind of a waste to me.
Yeah.
But if our redshirt freshman receiver, if he's a redshirt freshman next year, that sounds a lot better to me. So but again, I would leave it up to him.
And so to put some more context around this, he is 6'2", 182. So Trey Turner, quote tweeted, I think Tucker Holloway's return and said sticks. He's talking about the number, but he can also be talking about the legs. So this is a guy that it's going to take him a while to bulk up if he can even get there closer to 200.
He's made progress since the spring, since he got here. Like I saw him in the spring, and he's bigger now than he was then. So I think he's got a good frame on him. So you eventually get him up to around the 195 to 200 pound mark, and I think he's going to be a very good player.
That's exciting that David's writing an article on Tucker Holloway. He's got a really great family, as I remember from his official visit this past summer, or last summer. But I agree with you that he should, if he's going to play one more game, it should be against UVA in Lane Stadium, a game that we really need to win. It'd be so nice if he was going to run another touchdown.
If they play him this week against Duke and then he decides to redshirt, so whoever we replace him with against UVA, watch, we'll lose that game on a muffed punt.
Yeah.
Guarantee you.
Who would it be? What is the depth chart behind him
That's
right now?
an excellent question.
Kakavitsas, maybe?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Kakavitsas can catch the ball. I know that much about him.
Right.
So
We'll see. A couple more things to get to ahead of this game on Saturday, but I'm going to throw it back over to Carter in the fourth chair.
Well, I want to say, I think in my lifetime, this could be the least meaningful game Virginia Tech has ever played in from a win-loss standpoint.
what do you
really,
mean by
just
that?
because
Yeah,
I think
expand on that.
if they had beaten Georgia Tech last week, there's still something to play for in this game.
You're right.
You're still
right.
playing for a bowl game. Liberty and UVA, you can muster enough to say, we really need to win this game.
When's the last time Virginia Tech played a football game that was...
Knowing they weren't going to a bowl game, I guess that plays a huge impact.
I would say the bowl game last year was meaningless.
But you could have it could have been a winning season if you had won
That's
that game.
true.
That's
true.
the one thing about that
That's
one.
true. Like, so you're right. So you don't gain anything this week. You can't have a winning season. Can't go to a bowl. You gain a win over Duke,
Right.
But like no like extra accolade or anything. So yeah, this might be probably the most meaningless game since 92, probably.
It is a meaningful game, though, from perception, because if Duke rolls out there with their first-year head coach and first-year coaching staff, and they roll...
If it's another 45-10 game.
Right. And they roll your first-year head coach and first-year coaching staff a year after you beat them 45-17.
Right.
It's more grist for the mill.
Correct. Or if Tech pulls the upset, then people get in a better mood, and maybe that builds confidence, and you pull around. And so if either one of those things happens, then maybe the game's not so meaningless. But if it's like, if Tech loses by 10 or 14 points or something like that, which is kind of what most people expect, then it probably becomes meaningless at that point. Yeah. So we'll decide next week whether it was meaningless or not.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I just said win-loss standpoint. Because Liberty, you want to beat Liberty. And UVA, there's
Yes,
always
you do.
something to play for there.
Correct.
So.
Upset season at Liberty, that would be something. Well, Duke is coming off of a 3-9 season, like we said. It looks like Virginia Tech might have the same result this year. Obviously, if they win that UVA game, they would finish 3-9, assuming the next 2 weeks might not go over well. We'll see. But Duke has looked better this year. They sit at 6-3 with some close losses. They could easily be 9-1. This blueprint for success from Mike Elko has been utilizing the transfer portal, and specifically those transfer portal players working out, as well as developing the players they already had at a high level. Is that kind of how you see Brent Pry utilizing this next offseason?
It has to be. I mean, Virginia Tech has to be a player development program. We have to have coaches who can make our 3-star players better. I mean, Duke's recruiting classes, I mean, I went back in an article last week and went over the last 5 recruiting classes for Virginia Tech, Duke, Liberty, Wake Forest, and Kansas. And Virginia Tech easily has the best recruiting classes out of those 5 years.
Easily out-recruited all of those schools.
Right. So, like, Liberty signed the recruiting class outside the top 100 3 of the last 5 years, right? Duke's recruiting is generally in the 50s. I think Virginia Tech has had 1 year outside the top 50 in recruiting. And you're right, exactly. So it's like you have to be good at evaluation, and then you have to be able to develop the guys that you have. And so far, this Duke staff has been able to do that. They've taken a bunch of guys who were horrible last year and improved them by a whole lot. And almost all of their portal additions were good evaluations, and they've been able to put them all in a position to succeed. So, like I said, I'm like, just that doesn't have anything to do with Virginia Tech. Like, I think the Duke staff has done an awesome job this year. This is about as good like a single season coaching job I think that you can do.
Yeah, I think say Virginia Tech finishes 3-9 this year, just as Duke finished 3-9 last year. If we're at this point in the season next year and Virginia Tech is 6-3, that's a pretty good turnaround.
It would be amazing turnaround.
I would be happy with that.
Look, Duke could lose the rest of their games, and I'd still say the same thing about them. They'd still be a tremendously improved team from last year.
Well, getting into game picks, we're deadlocked again this week. Everyone picking Duke. Chris, I know a big part of your decision to pick Duke was just the fact that Virginia Tech has not been able to score 30 points this year, and that's something that Duke has done comfortably.
Duke has scored over 30 points for their last 5 games, and Virginia Tech hasn't scored 30 all year. So to me, it's kind of simple math.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, Duke's running game is so good. And with the exception of the NC State game, like, Virginia Tech hasn't been able to stop the run over their last 6 games.
Duke has scored over 30 points 7 times, 8 times
Yeah,
this year.
and Virginia Tech hasn't done it once.
Yeah.
Do you want to hold on to that stat, or did we already say it?
Which one, the 30-point thing?
Yeah.
So I think the last time, I think that was 1977 was the last time Tech hadn't scored over 30 points. The last time they went this deep into the season was 1990 when they didn't score over 30 until the very last game of the season.
Right, and so the
That could happen
the last
this year.
time, yeah. So they
Against UVA?
if Tech that's true, but if Tech doesn't score 30 in a game this year, it'd be the first time since 77.
77, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if you just look at the numbers, it just doesn't seem very likely at all that Virginia Tech's going to win this game. So it's kind of hard not to pick Duke.
Yeah, and so then you go searching for, and I did this last week too, you go searching for what are the intangibles, which are turnovers and penalties. And we already went over how Duke's number 3 in the country in turnover margin. And I can't remember the exact number on penalties. I could scroll through my phone. They're solid. They're like number 40 in the country on penalties per game. And Tech is, you know where Tech is.
Every number you look at for this basically favors Duke. How I picked the game is I just looked at Duke's last, 5 or 6 games and said, looks like they're scoring about 38 points per game in that span. And I did the same thing for Tech, and it's like, we're scoring about 21 a game over our last 5. So I just picked it 38-21 Duke.
I was going to say that's where you got that from.
That's where I got it from.
So we changed things up in the game preview on the website this week. Somebody suggested, why don't you put the fan prediction poll after the preview before your picks? We were putting it at the bottom of everything, and people were reading our picks, and that was, coloring their perception.
Fair enough.
So I think that's a good argument. So I put it after Chris did all of his informational stuff. I put it right there. We're 359 votes in, and 57% of fans are picking Duke to win by 11 plus. Another 26% are picking Duke to win by 1 to 10. So if you do your math, that's 83% of Tech fans are weighing in with Duke winning.
And that's before they read our
That's before
picks.
they read ours. And Chris was 38-21 Duke. I was 31-17 Duke, and David was 34-24 Duke.
Dave is the positive one this week.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a 10.5 point spread.
Yes.
It's just hard to believe that Virginia Tech football is a double-digit underdog against Duke football.
And what is it going to be next week?
It's hard to also believe that Virginia Tech men's basketball beat Duke in an ACC tournament final.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can't ask for everything good to happen to you at the same time. That's a little greedy. So maybe this is like payment for maybe this is what we have to pay to win the ACC title one year in basketball. That's what I'll choose to think.
Who was the LSU football coach that had to deal with the devil? Les Miles.
Les Miles, yeah. And then he took his deal to Kansas, and it didn't work out so well.
Well, that was what he had to pay for, his soul and finishing his career at Kansas.
That's true. Yeah.
That makes sense, Will, that you said you moved the score poll, because I'm looking at the preview before this to figure out what y'all's picks are. And I'm like, where's the score poll? I want to know what the fans
So for
voted.
those who go to the preview and scroll down just to vote in the poll, they're wondering where it is as well.
So all of your picks have something in common, that you all pick Duke to score above 30, and you all pick Virginia Tech to score less than 30.
Yeah.
I'll pick Virginia Tech to score 30 again. I think when they actually they got to do it first.
They tried really hard to not score 30 points last week. We were so
my God,
close.
a missed field goal, missed extra point, had the ball inside the 10 and fumbled.
It's all my fault. William Ross lines up for that field goal early fourth quarter with 27 points, and I'm like, Tech hasn't scored 30 all year.
That's right.
All I ask is that it is not a replica of the 45-10 game in 2019 where Michael Vick was here on the sidelines, the whiteout,
That was miserable.
the epitome of brutality.
Let's see. So the last 2 times Michael Vick has been in town, we've been outscored.
Oh gosh.
I'm horrible at math. 78-20?
Yep.
What was the WVU game?
Yeah.
41-12, and that is 76 to what was
that was 33-10. So yeah, the West Virginia game.
Yeah, it's math I don't even want to do.
Yeah. So maybe instead of like the next time we invite him back, maybe we instead of just standing him on the sideline, maybe we should put him on the field instead. stick a uniform on him.
He told me, he said, I still got 2 years of eligibility left.
He does. He does. Well, that seems like a good chance or a good point to move on from football and move on to basketball. I don't really have any specific questions for you guys here. I kind of just wrote down a bunch of stats. It was 2 pretty great performances for the men's and the women's team. The big takeaway from the men's is Grant Basile, as advertised.
6 3-pointers in his debut, and
Man,
showed some ability around the basket too. Now, Mike Young wasn't very impressed.
He was mad as a hornet at the half for several reasons.
He was mad after the game because he said something like Basile may have scored 30, but he gave up 24.
Yeah.
So he was not happy about Basile's defense in that game.
Delaware State had some quick guys. They got off to a good start.
Oh, come on. They won like 2 games last year.
That's true. I forgot
2
that.
and 25.
Hey, man, don't sleep on the Hornets, all right? We'll see where they finish up this year.
They win 95-57. I was really hoping that they would hit that 100-point mark.
For a while you're sitting there thinking, man, they're just trying to keep track with the women's team.
Yeah.
It's going to be a competition to see who can score the most. But there was at the 8 or 9 minute mark of the second half, the men's team went into like a 4-minute funk where they didn't score at all, and that was it.
Well, didn't they put in Cam Johnson with like 10 minutes left to go in the game?
Sure did.
And then I don't think he scored.
Correct.
Man, you got to give the ball a walk on. Yeah, he didn't take a shot.
Well, that early though, those guys did a good job playing within the offense. Because you're a walk on, you're not going to get
putting up shots.
You're not going to get very many opportunities. So credit to those guys' discipline for playing within the offense.
So Patrick Wessler and Darren Buchanan were both in street clothes. I guess I was a little bit surprised to know that they're potentially, or I guess that they are going to redshirt this year.
I'm not surprised. Wessler needs time to develop, particularly I think with the speed of the game. And that was one of the things I was watching with Basile. He can play at this level in terms of just speed of the game. But Buchanan, I think Buchanan's got tremendous potential, but he is raw.
Tech's got 3 guys that can play the 5 spot. Even Mutts in very limited minutes in certain matchups can play it. There's no point in wasting Wessler's red shirt to play him a total of 12 minutes and against bad competition and non-conference portion of the schedule. So I was kind of expecting that. Now I'm pleasantly surprised that they're going to try to redshirt Buchanan. And yes, Tech also has depth at the 4, but he's also physically ready. He could help. But I love that.
He's a hoss.
I love that. And I love that both guys are willing to do that as well.
They were excited on the bench. I was watching them. They were, jumping up and down, getting excited for their teammates.
You got to recruit guys who fit your culture and who are going to be willing to buy in on stuff like that. And the good thing about both of those guys is I think they're both good prospects, but they were under-recruited prospects. So it's not like they got all spoiled by the recruiting process and said, "Oh man, I should have gone here over Virginia Tech because they would have let me play." So I'm telling you, Mike Young, the way he's built his program is very impressive. The man has gotten me an ACC championship. Now he's redshirting people.
Love to see it.
Build the statue right now.
Yeah. So the other thing from that game that I was paying attention to was Sean Padula. Not how he shot, because he's a great shooter, but he had 8 assists, only 2 turnovers. So that's a good ratio. And David had told us before the game, David got to watch a lot of a practice one day. And he stood there in the office probably the day of probably Monday, and he said, so I watched that scrimmage and Sean Padula, and then David paused, and I was like, is this going to be good or bad? And he said he had a lot of turnovers. And Mike Young mentioned in his post-game comments that Sean's taking care of the ball.
We're not supposed to talk about this because we're talking about one of those preseason exhibition games that...
Oh, I thought he was talking about being at a practice scrimmage, just the Tech team.
No, he was talking about their scrimmage against Richmond.
Mike was?
No. David was.
No, he wasn't. He was talking.
So David got this information from somebody who's not supposed to talk about the exhibition.
All right, well, then there was some concern, but Mike Young backed it up by saying that he thought Sean had played better in terms of taking care of the ball. So Young didn't specifically talk about that, but he did say that he played better than he had been. I think.
What I meant is I don't want to get David in trouble with his source. Because his source isn't supposed to be talking about the exhibition, the scrimmage.
I thought David said he himself watched something.
No. There was one open practice, and that was the one we all went to.
Well, it's out there on
Trust me.
YouTube, and
Now everybody knows, and Dave's going to get in trouble.
Well, something definitely to watch with Sean Padula moving into a starting role this year. Also, Darius Maddox moving into a starting role. He had 14 points in the night. 2 pretty good complementary pieces for Grant Basile, who obviously led the way.
do you know what Maddox shot
From 3-point range, 0 of 1.
just overall?
It's a good thing is like Tech made a bunch of 3-pointers, and Maddox didn't make any of them.
Yeah.
And I don't think he made one. And then Hunter Couture only made 1. So that's like 2 of your big gunners right there that only combined for 1, and you still made 14.
I thought Basile and Padula kind of sucked the air out of the room as far as shooting 3-pointers, and that's not a criticism. It's just there's only so many of them you can
Always
take.
so many of them. And now, the last time Tech played Delaware State, the Hokies set a school record 21. So only made 14 this time against your Hornets.
Yeah, combined 1 for 5 between Couture and Maddox.
So that's the good thing about this game, or about this team. There's so many guys that you can rely on to score in double figures any given night. It's just so many different scoring options. Just so many options in general. Like on paper, it's a better basketball team than the one Tech had last year. Now you're going to have to see how quickly they mesh and everything like that. But on paper, this is a more talented, deeper team with a better chance of making a postseason run. Like, what Tech did last year was improbable because, like, David Gassan was their backup at both center and power forward. I mean, they just didn't have much depth on that team, and they had no lineup versatility. Just not a lot of size. And this year, they actually look the part of ACC champions, whereas they did not last year. It doesn't mean they're going to win the ACC again, but I think they've got a higher ceiling than last year's team.
Back to the freshmen, I guess Rodney Rice and MJ Collins, more developed than the other two, are expected to play more. MJ Collins made his name known with that dunk.
Yeah, he did. It was nice to see, and he's a good player. I think he's a good prospect. And I wondered whether we're going to play him at point guard and leave Couture at wing with Rice out, but they were playing Couture as the backup point and with MJ Collins on the wing. So that means when Rice comes back, he's going to probably play point guard. I would say. But he's going to be behind. I mean, these days, like the development part of being a freshman starts in August, and his isn't starting until November. So, like, he's going to in January, he's going to be at the point where all the current freshmen are now, like in January and February, with his knowledge of the offense and everything like that. So he's behind. So don't expect miracles there from him, but he's going to slide in and play some.
It'd be nice if David was here. I want to shout out the women's team with the 101-45 win over Mount St. Mary. So a very much dominant performance there. Caleb King breaks the record for single game 3-pointers with 9, previously held by Asia Shepherd.
Asia Shepherd had at least 2 games where she scored 8. I was looking at it today, and in the record book, it was she holds the record for 3-pointers in an ACC game with 8. She did it twice. And
is there a couple records that she's known for with 3-pointers? Like, what was
career 3-pointers?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think she played 5 years, right, Nick?
And all-time points.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is, I think a lot of people would consider Kayla King to be anywhere between Virginia Tech's 4th and 6th best player.
Right. She doesn't get the credit that she deserves.
Correct. And she still scored 33.
Yeah.
So, again, it's like the men's team. There's so many different scoring options on that team. It's very deep. I mean, that's a legit deep postseason team right there.
Yeah. The Achilles heel for the women's team that David pointed out in his post-game article was their turnover margin as well. Had 19 turnovers, 15 from the 5 starters. So not a finished product, but they'll get there. They are a team that has so much talent. So
these games, I didn't see that game in person. I did see the men's game. And once the lead gets to be 20 or 30, it does start to look like playground ball. Both teams, you know.
And again, you've got a lot of people. We got a lot of transfers, and they're all getting used to playing with each other for the first time.
Yeah.
You just got to make sure you don't do. I think Tech is talented enough to overcome a turnover problem against most teams. I think they can out-talent most of the teams they play this year. But when you go out there against your NC States and your Tennessees, like, you'll have to tighten it up in those specific games.
It'll be. I think UNC is an ACC team that is coming on strong. I thought UNC looked really good last year, and they were young, so it'll be interesting to see what they do this year.
Their women's team?
Yeah.
I know their men's team. I mean, they're the number 1 team in the country. They only won by like 11 or 12 this past week against UNCW.
I think Florida State lost to
Stetson.
Yep. And UVA didn't play well either.
Like up 67.
Wow.
That's a lot for them. That's like a normal team giving up like 85.
So, Nick, in case you didn't hear, Nick said that UVA gave up 67. So, man, I'll take that 95
Shaking
to
the rest off.
57.
Yeah, absolutely. They didn't hit 100 points, but still a better showing than some of those other ACC teams that are supposed to be powerhouses. Did you have something, Carter?
Well, Boston College also just edged out Cornell 79-77.
Yeah, Boston College returned all 5 starters, but they're not very talented starters. but I can't make fun of them though, because that's the only team Mike Young hasn't beaten.
Yes.
Since
Really?
since he became Virginia Tech's head coach.
Are you saying the name James Carnick over there?
Yeah.
He's gone though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, praise be.
That was the game last year. Everybody thought Tech's NCAA tournament hopes were done.
Oh,
They
yeah.
probably were if they didn't win the ACC.
Yeah. So coming up, men's team plays Lehigh tomorrow night, and
Thursday.
then women's team plays Bucknell on Friday night. Before we get out of here, let's take a couple questions, Carter, from the YouTube chat and Twitter.
2 good questions, one in the YouTube chat, one on Twitter. Actually, a couple good questions, but a lot of them were answered. Big Tom wants to know, how much can you attribute Duke's surge this year with a first-time head coach to Elko hiring experienced coordinators versus Pry hiring young first-time coordinators?
I mean, that's a fair question. No, it could. First of all, like, even the best coordinators, at one point they were first-year coordinators and inexperienced. Like, I think Ricky Bussell is the best offensive coordinator Virginia Tech has ever had. And when Frank Beamer promoted him to offensive coordinator, Bussell had never been an offensive coordinator. But yet his very first year, Virginia Tech had one of the best offenses in the country.
Was that 1993?
93, absolutely. So, like, you can't say, oh, just because a guy has more experience, he's gonna be better than the guy with no experience, because sometimes it does not work out that way. But I do think when you're maybe a first-year head coach, like, I think there's a reason Elko did that. Him as a first-time head coach, and he wanted veteran guys around him. Some of their regular assistants are a little bit more inexperienced than you would like, but it's not like Duke has the biggest budget of the world, and I think he decided to put his budget into coordinators rather than, like the tight ends coach or something like that. Virginia Tech put a big budget into everything. With their coaching staff.
So the other thing we don't know enough about Duke to evaluate is, and one of the things we talked about with Tech's offensive coaches, is that they all kind of come from different systems, so it may be taking a while to mesh.
Yes.
Elko may have hired guys. He may have had a vision for how he wanted to run his offense, and he may have hired guys that all fit together and can hit the ground.
Yeah,
running.
it's hard to say with that. Now, I do know. I think on offense they have a running game coordinator and they have an offensive coordinator. Of course, I don't know if somebody has the title of passing game coordinator or not. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But it's possible that, like, their offensive line coach / running game coordinator shares very, very similar philosophies with the offensive coordinator. But yeah, in the case of Virginia Tech, like, Bowen coming from one certain offense. Obviously, Joe Rudolph coming from a Wisconsin offense, which is different, and Brad Glenn has run different offenses, and they all have a coordinator title within the offense. So you've got 3 chefs trying to cook a meal, and, like, they've all cooked different kind of meals before, but they've never tried to cook this specific kind of meal before, but they're all trying to cook it together. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't, and we'll find out.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you can't undersell is you look particularly at the Duke offensive line, 3 graduate transfers that have come in and are starting. And it looks like, without knowing the details of when they recruited and when they hired their coaches and all that, it looks like, again, they had a vision for how they wanted to run their offense, and they pulled guys from the portal that they knew would fit.
Yeah, and I wonder if Tech wasn't too picky with their guys. They really wanted to sign an offensive lineman badly last year, but they really only
Out of the portal.
Yeah, but they really only went after one, and they couldn't even get him to visit. So it's almost seemed like they didn't think anybody else was a fit. Well, if you're running an offense where only one lineman per year is a fit for your offense, then you're running the wrong offense.
Right.
So I think you got to do a better job this year if you're Virginia Tech. I mean, because Tech is going to need a lot of guys in the portal this year. They better get a lot of guys in the portal, I think. And but it's going to be very important that those guys are the right fit and they're coached up properly. And quite frankly, I mean, Tech did evaluate some guys at other positions. Like, they really need an outside receiver right now, and the JMU guy was available, and he's originally from Richmond, but he went to South Carolina. They really needed another defensive tackle, and Kobe Turner was their number one target on defense, and he played for Richmond and is from Northern Virginia. And he went to Wake Forest. Yeah. He visited Tech, and Wake just beat Tech out for him. And guess what? He's like the fifth highest rating defensive tackle in the country this year. So, Virginia Tech, they just flat out got beat by Dave Clawson for a key recruit, and they flat out got beat by Shane Beamer for a key recruit. So they not only have to do a better job like evaluating those guys going in the next season, but they have to do a better job at head-to-head recruiting as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Last one. This one comes from Twitter. Dylan Osborne wants to know who's going to be the surprise guy for the last 3 weeks that hasn't played a ton to get some playing time.
Oh, well, hopefully Holloway, if they play him on offense. Like if you don't redshirt him, then I feel like you need to get him some time on the offensive side of the ball. For the most part, though, I don't think there's going to be many surprises because Brent Pryde does not seem like the coach, and I agree with him on this. He's just not going to hand people playing time just to see what they can do. Coaches don't do that. Like, if you're not doing anything in practice, then unless a bunch of dudes are hurt, a coach isn't going to play you. Like, generally, if fans are wondering why we wonder why Christian Moss isn't playing. And you know what? Probably the reason is because he's not practicing well. That's probably the reason.
There's something else.
Right.
It's not just a coach looking at the end of the game going, "Oh, I forgot to play."
Darn. Yeah, we don't like that guy. So they're not going to put anybody in there that doesn't earn it unless they absolutely have to. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of surprises, to be honest with you, unless it's Holloway.
Yeah. Maybe Gosnell. I know he played a lot earlier in the year. I don't see anything coming out of the tight end position. Daquan Wright has already made an impact. Or running back. So I think I can't think of anybody on defense. So those guys.
Yeah, I think that's we are who we are at this point.
We have spent a lot of time talking about Tucker Holloway in the last two podcasts.
Well, he deserves it.
Well, why not? It's one of the most positive things that have come out of the season, I guess.
Did you see how his teammates just mobbed him on the sideline?
Yeah,
that's kind of a sign that he's well liked.
Yeah. And especially after his tweet yesterday where he listed out all the guys who were blocking for him.
Wasn't it fantastic?
Yeah,
and he said,
that was awesome.
He said we broke the record.
Yes.
In the tweet. So I thought that was key. I think so. He gets it.
Yeah, he gets it. I think that's what Coach Price said when he coached.
He also tweeted out the list of Georgia Tech players who are on their punt team because they helped too.
They did help. They are a horrible punt team. But still.
That would have been hilarious.
You go back and watch that touchdown, and there's some dudes that aren't trying real hard for Georgia Tech.
That's a horrible. Anyway.
They're a horrible punt team.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Carter, for reading those off. Game previews posted on techsideline.com, so make sure you check that out and vote in the score poll. Read David's recap articles from the basketball games on Monday. Chris, you said you have an article coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a true freshman report talking about the redshirt status. They could also redshirt Malachi Thomas. They could also redshirt Dorian Strong. And they said those conversations are happening. So I'm writing a little bit about that as well.
Going to be very interesting to see what happens with that one.
Yep, and David's going to have a great article as well on Holloway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Another great episode of the Tech Sideline podcast. I want to thank everybody on set today. Will Stewart, founder and general manager of Tech Sideline. He's at Will Stewart TSL on Twitter. Chris Coleman, lead analyst and columnist for Tech Sideline. He's at Chris Coleman TSL. Carter Hill in the fourth chair. He's at CB Hill 03 on Twitter. And Nick Brown producing. Thank you, Nick. The Hokies take the field for Game 10 against Duke at noon inside Wallace-Wade Stadium on Saturday. It'll be a great day for some football. High of 72 degrees, so I hope to see a lot of Hokies there. But if not, it'll be televised on RSN, and we'll be back Monday morning to break it all down. I'm Katie Adams signing off from all of us here at Tech Sideline. Enjoy the game, Hokies fans, and enjoy your weekend.